Hi, my name's Leo and I'm a boat builder and a sailor, and I'm on a mission to rebuild and restore this 108-year-old classic sailing yacht, Tally Ho. Last episode I took the old keel timber out and bolted together the two parts of the new keel timber, and now what I've got to do is cut the shape into the new keel timber and get ready to put that back into the boat. Sailor keeps sitting in tar. No. Alright, well, I'm just getting ready to cut the keel timber. I took a pattern off the old one, drew around it, cut it out with a skill saw, transferred that with tape. I use tape because pencil lines are really hard to see in Purpleheart, and also I wanted to take the pattern off and then look at the fairness of the lines and adjust them slightly, which I've done. And I've had to extend that slightly because of the damage to the old keel. I've had to use a bit of guesswork to extend those lines further aft. Also took all the bevels off the old keel, transferred them onto the new one, so those are the numbers that I've written on the tape. This is the bottom face of the keel, which will join the lead ballast keel. Alright, so this is the pretty amazing chainsaw jig that was made for me by Mark at Wolf Metalworks, and Mark happens to be the driver of the truck that originally brought Tally Ho in here, so big thanks to him for this. Designed to make the chainsaw into essentially an enormous jigsaw. But the cool thing about it is you can spin this and that changes the bevel, the angle of the saw as it comes down, so you can essentially cut long rolling bevels with this. Well, so far I'm really impressed. This thing is cutting really easily through the Purpleheart. It's got a ripping chain on it, and that's cutting a lot better than the cross-cutting chain I was using before when I cut the scarf. And the blade's staying straight, it's keeping the right angle. I might have to put some kind of counterweight on the side so I don't have to keep holding the side down that's not hanging off. Really cool that it's blowing all the shavings down, so the top of the wood staying nice and clean. Now I just got to hope my cut's in the right place. The saw is supposed to lubricate itself, but I've just put a bit in here. I'm going to just make sure it gets extra lubrication because this wood is pretty tough. It's doing pretty well, but I want to make it as easy as possible for it. I'm just sharpening this chain obviously, and as this is a ripping chain rather than a cross-cutting chain, the teeth are sharpened at 10 degrees rather than 30 degrees on a cross-cut chain. And also it doesn't have the little clearing teeth in between, it's just got these cutting chisel teeth, and it works a lot better than using a cross-cut, because when I cut the scarf I hadn't got my hands on a ripping chain yet, and it was a real pain to cut the scarf, it took forever. This is going to be the bottom of the timber. I'm going to finish the top and bottom, but all the other parts of it I'm going to just rough out basically. I'm going to put it in the boat, and then it's going to be much easier to fair that to the shape of the hull once everything else is on. So it's not going to look like a beautiful finished piece of wood when it goes in the boat, but it will hopefully be slightly oversized and not slightly undersized. The scarf's come out well. I'm pretty happy that as I've cut through it, it's just as tight as it was on the edges. The surfaces were all completely flat, so you know, that's what I expected, but it's nice just to see it. Still oozing a little bit of tar there, that's a good sign as well. And it hasn't opened up at all as I've been moving the piece of wood around, which is good. Obviously once it's actually in the boat, it's going to be backed up with a lot more bolts and pieces sandwiching it together on top and the bottom. So this is at its most vulnerable really. So this enormous piece of Purpleheart is remarkably clear grained, but there is one large knot in it. I'm just going to put a graving piece or a Dutchman in. What I'm doing here is just using a router to take away all the softwood and the areas where there's an actual void associated with this knot here. And it's a bit like being a dentist, I imagine. You just keep grinding until you get to the bottom of the rot. Now to get this fairly rough cut piece of lumber into something square and symmetrical, first I'm just going to run it over this machine. Now I think in the States you guys call this a jointer. In England we call it a planer. There's some confusion of terminology, and I think what we call a thicknesser you call a planer. Anyway, the name doesn't really matter. This thing makes things flat and the other thing makes them thinner. So first of all I'm just going to flatten one of the wide faces on this machine. Then I'm going to check that the fence is 90 degrees to the bed, and I'm going to run the flat face against the fence. That's going to give me a flat edge which is square to the bottom face. Now at this stage I can run it through the table saw, and I can use those flat edges as references and square up all the other edges. Now I just ran this through the table saw a few times, and put these angled edges on it, and that's just to give it a little bit more surface area, and so the grain is not just gluing on a direct butt. It doesn't make that much difference, but that's the done thing. Now I just push this through the table saw super quickly, and you'll notice that it's not exactly symmetrical, and you'll also notice that I didn't measure anything. Now that's the beauty of making a graving piece in this way. Now although I'm sure to many people it's obvious, it's almost something I don't want to show, because as a boat builder, using this technique to put graving pieces in decks and things, people are always really impressed with how quickly you can get a really good tight fit on a piece. Now this technique really is incredibly simple. The next stage is just to follow your marks from the Stanley knife with the chisel. I'm just going to use regular PU polyurethane glue for this.
A year later on there's John Barleycorn and bits of organic.
It's not the nicest graving piece I've ever made, but it's tight enough, it's fine. And that will be hidden forever on top of the ballast keel. Alright, well I'm actually starting to think about how I'm going to get the new keel in underneath the boat. And I was planning to rough out the rabbet on the new keel before I put it in, but the more I thought about it, the more I realised that it would probably make more sense to just leave it and cut the rabbet afterwards. Anyway, something that I've noticed is that the top face of the ballast keel is slightly concave. Convex? Concave? I think it's concave. It goes up in the middle, and that is matched by the bottom face of the keel timber. In fact, the whole keel timber is very slightly bowed like that. It's not massive, but it's definitely noticeable, and I've planed the keel timber to be straight. I'd like to put it in straight as per the original plans if possible, and also make fitting everything a lot easier. So what I'm going to try and do is actually bend this lead ballast keel slightly to straighten it out. Well, I think that actually worked. The thing which actually worked best was just jacking it up at the ends. So yeah, that seemed to bend it straight. So this is Tom.
Hi.
Tom's just helping me out with a few jobs on the boat and moving the keel in today. All I'm doing here is just planing by hand the top face of the keel, and I'm just doing it very lightly, very quickly, just to take off the worst of the power plane marks. This part of the keel will be visible from inside the boat, but no one's going to look at it very much. I'm not going to waste much time on it. I'm going to spend 20 minutes just getting off the worst and leave it at that. I'm not going to bother with the saw marks from the mill. I very nearly didn't bother doing this at all, but I might be glad of it later, I suppose. You can also see that I've been putting linseed oil on this timber just to help with shrinkage and checking. One other thing, I've got these coach screws in the ends of each piece of the scarf. They're just mild steel zinc plated or something, so they're not permanent, but I'm going to leave them in for now, and it's just to make sure that the ends of the timbers are held down while I'm moving it around. So getting this new one in is going to be slightly harder than getting the old one out, because the new one is slightly longer than the old one, because the old one was damaged and cut short. Where the props are holding the boat up actually gets in the way of putting the new one in. There's one prop just behind me on the bow and then two on the stern that are in the way, so what I'm going to have to do is lift it up, slide one end in, and then sort of diagonally slide it back in between the two props at the stern until it can clear the prop at the bow, and then slide the front of the keel timber in. Well, done it. I mean, still got to block it up and do all sorts of things, but keel is more or less in the right place, and that's fantastic, because that was probably one of the more dangerous parts of this operation, and you know, there's still plenty of that left as well, but you know, that's a heavy piece of wood, and you know, of course, if it fallen over at all and taken out some of the props under the boat, then you know, the whole boat could have come down and crushed me, I suppose, as well as destroying the boat. It's pretty much in place now. I'm going to drop it down and dry fit it onto the ballast keel. Then I'm going to lift it up so it's pushing underneath the boat and supporting it. Like I said, I left it very oversized. Just getting it in position, I think, is a big step, and it must be a pretty good omen for the rest of the project that the boat didn't fall over and crush me to death. Well, that's it for now, so thanks a lot for watching, and massive thank you to everyone who's donated or otherwise contributed towards the Tally Ho project. It really does make a huge difference, and I really appreciate it. It also means I'm able to take the time to keep making these videos, so thanks again. I'm off for a celebratory run on the beach and then a couple of beers, I expect, so cheers, and I'll see you guys next time.